Good evening, welcome everybody. My name is Louise Renick and I'm the Program and Partnerships Coordinator here at the Forrest Research Foundation. On behalf of our Director, who sends his apologies, Professor James Avanatakis, I would like to welcome you all tonight and respectfully acknowledge the past and present traditional owners of this land on which we are meeting, the Whadjuk Noongar people. It is a privilege to be standing on Noongar country. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge our expert guest panellists this evening, Prashant Singh, Anna Zenz, Dr. Sandy Chong, and Ashley Pruitt. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us and share your experience and expertise. It is also a pleasure to welcome representatives from several government departments. Thank you also for coming along. I would also like to acknowledge Associate Professor Paul McGinn, who is the Director of the UWA Public Policy Institute and who will be moderating tonight's event. It is a pleasure to host you all here at Forrest Hall. For those who may not have been here before, I will tell you a little bit about Forrest Research Foundation. We were established by Andrew and Nicola Forrest with Australia's largest philanthropic donation with the aim of attracting and retaining the best emerging researchers in the world. Our aim is to have a steady state of 60 scholars, and our primary selection criterion is excellence. That is, we do not predetermine any of our research themes, and our researchers can be based at any of the 5 WA universities. Forrest researchers study everything from manta rays to meteorites, developmental psychology to DNA origami. We also support several writers, musicians and filmmakers through our creative fellowships. Most of our researchers live here at Forrest Hall, most of them just upstairs. Our aim is to create an interdisciplinary community where we come together to discuss, debate and collaborate. In this way, we are about more than the individual or their research, but the networks we form and the collaborations that follow. This evening's presentation is the second in our joint series covering policy taboos, in particular, policy and artificial intelligence. The first of these events, held in June, looked at the implications of AI in the academy. The speakers unpacked key tensions in the relationship between AI and academia, such as innovation versus exploitation, efficiency versus integrity, and automation versus human agency. During that discussion, the panel neither bought into the hype that AI can solve all our problems, nor that it will inevitably lead to the end of the world. What we need, they argued, was a nuanced approach to understand both the opportunities and the risks. AI represents a challenge on many levels, not least that it has become embedded in our institutions before much policy could be developed. To raise such questions, I would now like to introduce Paul McGinn to tell us more about the Policy Taboo series and tonight's event. Paul is the Director of the UWA Public Policy Institute, an urban planner and geographer. His research is at the intersection of people, place, policy and politics. His primary areas of research include strategic spatial planning, planning reform, Australian and global suburbanisms, urban and housing policy, multiculturalism, and the geographies of sexualities. Please welcome Paul.
Thanks everybody. If you haven't been to a Policy Taboos before, the way James and I kind of conceived this idea was a convivial space where we would look at contentious policy issues. Not necessarily controversial, that's up for you to decide whether they're controversial, but James and I consider things through a contentious lens. But we try to create a convivial space for exchange and conversation. And when we were kind of drawing up a list of various taboo topics to look at, when we landed on AI, we saw an opportunity to have, as Louise said, this kind of trifecta of discussions around AI. So we started off with AI in the academy. This one's turning to AI in policy making. And the third one, which we're working on and trying to craft at the moment, will be looking at AI in popular culture, because we think there's a feedback loop between those three things, basically, because invariably a lot of AI historically is actually featured in Hollywood movies, and it's either it's been in the Hollywood movies and it's become reality, or it already exists in reality, and Hollywood does what Hollywood does best and kind of blows it up out of all proportions and creates these amazing fantasy dystopias around AI. So for me, Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 are probably my touchstone moments, in terms of thinking about AI before I knew what AI even was. So tonight we've got 4 amazing speakers, and we try to get a variety of voices and perspectives and expertise. And with this one on policy making, we're looking at really, I suppose it's a question of, is it policy for AI and or AI in policy making? And they're 2 quite distinct things, but obviously they're interrelated. And there's quite a lot of academic research in this space, and particularly in public policy. So as people know, I'm quite fond of props, and I've just got paper props tonight. So no pictures of Al Gore talking about algorithms as I did in the last one. So, but there's a really nice little special issue in LSE's Public Policy Review looking at AI and public policy making. There's a range of papers, and I just picked 2 of them. One by Andrew Murray, which is talking about automated public decision making and the need for regulation. And so the word regulation is important there, because that really is, I think, where a lot of concern at the moment is, or has probably always been around AI. How do we regulate this thing? And then another paper from Omar Guerrero and Helen Margett, are all policymakers data scientists now? Data science and evidence in policy making. And I remember when I was doing my PhD in London, evidence-based policy making was all the rage, basically under the Blair government. But EBPM seems to have kind of sailed off slowly into the sunsets in some ways, basically. But I think it's coming back in with AI, because AI is seen as this kind of, uber data science methodology framework, so that we can do more efficient decision making and so forth. So that's a little bit about the kind of, I suppose, the academic context. But when you look at what governments are doing in particular, so there's a national framework for the assurance of artificial intelligence in government. This wonderful document here, and it's a comprehensive government approach, because it's the federal government and all the state and territory governments have come together, put their hive mind to kind of think about, how do we regulate AI. There's policy for the responsible use of AI in government as well, so this little document. And this one's quite interesting, because it talks about things in 3s, which is my favourite thing. And they talk about, where is it now? To enable, to engage, and to involve. That's the kind of the philosophical and political and policy frameworks that they're working with. It's here, we have to live with it, we have to work with it, and how do we navigate with it as well. The Governance Institute of Australia, along with the Australian Government Department of Industry, Science and Resources, had a white paper on AI governance a little while ago as well. And unless you've been living under a rock in the last week or so, you would have seen, or certainly read, this wonderful little document come out from the Productivity Commission, which has sparked considerable discussion and debate, particularly within the creative sector, because of the big questions around whether or not, the AI beast gobbling up all this intellectual property and the creative produce that comes from creatives. And I mean, it's interesting that it has been creatives, artists, fiction writers, and others in that there. Interestingly for me, there's been a lot of silence from the academic community on this, because interestingly, lots of academic books are already in large language models and being used to process data. And I had the pleasure last year of Cambridge University Press approached me and a colleague about a book that we had edited and written, asking if we would like to have our book put into the beast. And we thought and discussed it long and hard about it, and we decided no. We wrote back to Cambridge and said no, we don't want it to be in there. And then a report came out, I think it's Emma Young from the West was writing about creative writers here, and there was some repository somewhere that was sucking up all this creative writing stuff, and some of her books were in there. So I went looking to see if any of my books were in there, and sure enough, my book with Cambridge University Press is up there somewhere in the AI beast. So it's is it too late, basically? So with all this kind of policy analysis and academic analysis, I think we're on a really timely discussion tonight. So I think it's really great to have all of our speakers here, and I'm going to do a quick intro to them all. And the way this is going to work, basically, so in case you haven't been here before, each of the speakers, we're all going to come up here. There's no slides, it's a conversation. Each speaker is going to have 6 minutes. They're going to shoot from the hip about their topic and issue. In between each speaker, at the conclusion of speaker one, I might ask a question, if or I might throw it out to you, just for a quick question. And the operative word there is quick and question. Okay? No existential ramblings. Okay? It's called a Q&A session for a reason. Okay? Question and answer. You ask the question, our panelists answer. Okay? And then we'll move to the next speaker, and it'll be rinse and repeat as we go along. And then we'll come back to a general Q&A session for things as well. So, who is here with us tonight for our policy debut, which is, in case you haven't read, the title is Cash Me If You Can, Participation in, Power Off and Protection from AI in Policy Making. And this was a collaborative title made, crafted by me and my esteemed colleague Claire. Where is Claire? She's hiding behind that pillar. Oh, there she is there. So this is a collaborative effort in terms of the title as well. We try to be playful with things. So our panelists tonight are Prashant Singh, who only holds the record for attendance at policy debut and PPI events. So it's a bit like the loyalty card at a cafe. After 7 stamps, you get to be a panelist. So thanks, Prashant, for buying all the, attending all the events. So Prashant currently works for the West Australian State Government and contributes to strategic cybersecurity initiatives and serves on multiple community boards. He formerly served as the Chief Information Security Officer for the UWA Police, and he now leads cybersecurity efforts within the WA Department of Education. So a good spread of kind of in the public sector. And Prashant's title of his little provocation tonight is AI is writing the future and policy is still using a typewriter. So I'm waiting to see if he's brought a typewriter with him for tonight as well. So, and then our next speaker is, let's get this right, Anna Zens, sorry, yeah. And Anna has an amazing connection with the Policy Institute because she was with the Policy Institute when it first set up, so we're getting a lot of repeat business here, which is really good. I like this. So, and Anna is a newly appointed lecturer in the school, UWA Law School, so congratulations, Anna. And a PhD candidate at the UWA Tech and Policy Lab. Her research sits at the intersection of law and technology, property law, regulatory studies, and discourse analysis. And Anna's title of her provocation tonight is What Not to Do in AI Policy Making, Lessons from the Drone. So that's definitely got the Terminator 2 vibe. Definitely. I think this is going to be a good one as well. And then next we have Sandy Chong. Yeah. Get your details here, Sandy. This is pretty impressive. Should say Dr. Sandy Chong. So Sandy is a member of the World Economic Forum Expert Network and chair of the ASEAN Business Alliance. She's an award-winning International Business Executive of the Year and Asia's Top Sustainability Women of the Year and Singapore Management Consultant of the Year as well. So it's a pretty impressive CV, Sandy. So thank you very much for surrendering your time and coming to speak with us tonight. So, and then finally, give you your title. Whose intelligence, ? question mark, rethinking power, participation and policy in the age of AI. And then last but by no means least is Ashley Pruitt. So Ashley is Director of Data Policy at the Office of Digital Government in the WA Department of Premier and Cabinet. She leads initiatives that leverage government data to inform decision making, service delivery and better community outcomes. And I think we're going to speak to this. Are we regulating, are we creating policy for and on AI, or what is the role of AI in policy making? And I think Ashley's at that really nice intersection, at the heart of government and DPC, and we'll have a kind of a bird's eye view of kind of what's going on in the policy space. So welcome, Ashley. And you're also, I believe, a PhD candidate here. PhD candidate here at UWA. I told you, we have family. We're creating family tonight. UWA family. And Ashley's provocation is titled AI in the Public Sector, Balancing Innovation and Risk. We're ready to go. Time starts now, Christian. Over to you.
Thank you everyone. Before I start, I just want to acknowledge the country we are meeting today, and I pay my respect to the elder past, present, and emerging. It's good to come back again, as Paul mentioned. I'm a repeat customer. I don't have a lot of the card with me, but I do have a very strong inkling to learn and understand the world, and that's always been kind of growing up. And I've got a very funny story to tell you my perspective of AI. Being a son of a veterinarian, AI meant very different to me when I was growing up, and wasn't that AI. So that AI word is very different meaning to me. So that's kind of I can tell you. But on jokes apart, but if you look at the world, and if I can ask a question, how many of you in the audience actually use AI, or you know someone using AI? Your hands up a little bit. You can see the majority of people, if you take a cross section, represent almost 70 to 80% are using AI. So AI is here. AI is in our pockets. AI are in our hospital. AI is in our public sector. AI is in our private sector. AI is making decisions. AI is not going anywhere. AI is here. And just yesterday, one of the biggest startup on AI in India, Perplexity AI, actually wanted to buy a Google Chrome as a browser. So AI is actually increasing its speed and momentum. So where is policy? Now, it's very good to see some of the writing here. Improving lives through evidence-based policy. What is policy? Policy is just an instrument for an outcome. We all know we sharpen our knife in kitchen every day, but do we sharpen how we design policies? Because policies, if you go back, rooted in the history, 160 years old Westminster system, where we have public servant deciding and giving advice to the minister. That's how dated the policy process is. So look at the process of the policy. AI is speeding at the speed of light. Policy is just at the typewriter. So that, to me, need to change dramatically. If we don't change the tool, we can't get an outcome. And why we need that outcome? Because we need to make sure the policy is delivering outcome to improve the life of the citizens. So when we talk about using AI, let's talk about evidence-based. So AI can actually research documentation, data, collect information, make those information available to the policymaker, to the decision maker at the fingertip. And it's already happening. If you look at UK government is using 3 tools at the moment. One is not, they call it red bus, because they've got a red car, red bus, the telephone booth. Now red box. Red box is used to translate policy document into decisions for people who are serving customers or serving public. The second tool is called, consult. So basically, when we go out for policy decision, we consult member of public, we consult academia, we consult researcher. Thousands of documents turn up to our door. How a human can read that information? So they use it using AI to actually distill and make informed decisions. I make submission to the government many times. I wonder what process they go through. when making policy decisions. So those things need to be looked at as well. And also they're using a tool called ParlX to actually speed up the bill processing within the parliament. So you can see this AI is already here. So if 160-year-old Westminster system can turn 360 degree, use AI, why can't we? So if you're talking regulation, our regulation is still in catch-up mode. I was in Canberra a couple of years ago at the Technology and Government Forum. Bill Shorten was there. We were talking about, we are really 5-6 years behind in the game at the moment. So if we can't think our future in terms of creating value for our future, creating prosperity for our citizens, peace and making them employable and everything, we need to make sure that our policy is at the pace where technology is moving. So my provocation was, I was saying, Paul, how provocative I can be. I said, that's the only thing I can say, that AI is moving very fast and our policy making has to catch up. Absolutely, we cannot be in this state of life where we are at the moment. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. Just as you were reflecting there about the government going back 150 years and I suppose the notion of bureaucracy, I thought, are we entering a phase of botocracy, given that bots and bureaucracy are going to kind of, they're at an interface with one another,
Yeah.
and we're going to be moving away from, human agents, actors, to agentic things.
So this is very good question to what I always talk about. I talk about the term, Paul, you might have heard many times. I talk about intelligent governance. So governance is sensible. They understand, they shape up the policy based on the feedback. So, and how you reach that. It's not about using bots. We have to make sure that tools we are using is safe for use. So we have, as you mentioned, we have policy framework, we have AI governance framework, and the law is also coming. European law has already been passed last year, and we have very good world-class framework to make sure that when we use AI for decision making is within the framework. But what I want to say, there's opportunity to break the shackles between the department, between the agency, release the data, make sure AI learns from the data, get the decent insight, and make sure those distilled information are giving us informed decision making, powering the decision making for the future. I even want our decision maker to have a live dashboard. Like, say, for example, we're using AI to, if you travel on a network, we're using AI or smart decision making to regulate our traffic. We are using car. They're using AI to give us the different route if there's a traffic congestion. So AI need to be embedded in every part. So what I say, data is central to governance and government. AI is another layer. Make sure it's regulated, it's protected, it's safe to use, and there's a layer of security as well. So these things are quintessential for future government, intelligent government.
Okay. Right, Anna, I'm going to invite you into the conversation here. You and your drones. Tell us about this.
Me and the drones, yes. So I will use my sort of academic background and what I work on in my PhD project and on wider research as sort of a comparator for what we should or should not do in AI. So through my academic work, I studied the sort of broader power dynamics that we can see in tech and policy regulation. So who drives the policy agenda? Who benefits and who doesn't? Who is included in policy processes and who is not? Whose interests are served and whose aren't? And I've studied this in detail through the case of commercial drones and in particular delivery drones in Australia over the last few years. And this is an area that hasn't received as much attention as AI, but there are some striking parallels when it comes to the policy framing and the policy objectives in the case of drones that have led to, in part, not very desirable outcomes. And so for the purpose of my provocation, I have identified some, let's say, cautionary points stemming from Australia's approach to drone policy that I think we should be mindful of as we develop AI policies. And so, number one,
is that we have to pay attention to the overall policy agenda. So what's the fundamental problem we're trying to address through policy? It really matters how we frame the overarching aim of a given policy. So in the case of drones, it is explicitly to enable drone operation and increase drone uptake. That's the federal government's policy on drones. Similarly, in AI policy development, the emphasis is predominantly on embracing and driving adoption of AI technology and enhancing AI capability and things of that kind. If this is the underlying objective, it's all well and good to then say, you know, this should be done responsibly, this should be done safely, or in the case of drone policy, this should be in a way that's considerate of communities and the environment. These may possibly place limitations on the extent of adoption or the method of adoption, but really the policy framing of adoption renders them kind of second-tier priorities, and so the framing matters. And this leads to a situation where rather than addressing existing social, economic, infrastructure problems through available tools, one of which AI or drones could be potentially, the policy of uptake across the board really demands that we find or even create drone or AI-shaped holes that we can fill. Okay. My second point is that we need to interrogate assumed benefits of the technology in question. So both drone and AI policies are driven by the assumption that they will deliver vast benefits, economic, productivity, efficiency gains. And it's important to independently verify claims around these benefits by probing assumptions that are built into economic modeling, by conducting independent research instead of taking industry projections at face value, and also by interrogating the actual value propositions at the heart of these benefit statements. What is it that we're trying to achieve? Are we after efficiency? So do we want to do things faster so we can do more of the things? Or do we want efficacy? Do we want effectiveness? Do we want to do things differently so we can achieve different outcomes for social transformation? Those are two very different things. We also need to critically analyze what technology can and cannot do. So, you know, we need to identify where it can be adopted as an appropriate tool to address an existing problem. And what I observed in this context is this tendency in policy framing and in policy discourse to over-index on the speculative use cases of technology, which are oftentimes the ones that carry the most public benefit potentially. So things like in the drone case, you know, drone use for the delivery of life-saving medicine, or drone use by emergency response. Or in the AI case, you know, AI will find solutions to the climate crisis, or AI will be able to find cures for cancer, which is all great. But what's actually happening on the ground, what we're seeing at the moment are the kinds of use cases that don't really add a lot of value and are potentially more harmful than helpful. So in the case of drones, the number one item that's delivered by a drone in Australia at the moment is not life-saving medicine, it's cups of coffee, followed by roast chickens. Okay? So, and then the third point is it's really important to consult the public in this, and I mean genuine consultation, because we need to understand where the demand, if there is a demand for the technology in question, and you know what it is the public needs. What are the problems that we're trying to solve? And is the tech the right tool to solve that problem? And so consultation needs to be scoped and framed in a way that public actually has agency to support or to object a particular technology and to have their concerns met in a meaningful way. Consultation also needs to be on well-scoped, specific applications of the technology rather than general purpose applications. And there needs to be transparency about risks and costs and trade-offs that are involved in adopting technology, so that the public can make informed choices when they want to adopt or when they want to say no. But also so that you know, an overall policy on the tech can be aligned with other policies and other policy goals, such as emission reduction. And then my final point is, and I think that this is sort of the through line in my research, is I have found that there's foundational logic that underpins how policymaking is approached with technology, and that is the assumption that the adoption and uptake and proliferation of technology is inevitable. And it's important to know that this is a deliberate narrative that is driven by those who stand to gain from the disempowerment that comes with it. Because if something is accepted to be inevitable, resistance is futile, and submission, that means adoption, is the only way to go. And so these types of narratives take different shapes. They can be, as my colleague Julia Powles and I have called them, narratives of necessity or desire. So this is where the narratives around, drones are coming, and so you will want to get on a train, you will want to get involved, or you'll be left behind. There's also narratives around presumption, which is drones are already here, and so we need to make sure we accommodate them the best way we can, as safely as possible. Essentially, we are left with only how questions and not if questions. And this finds in expression in how governments and policymakers are approaching technology policy and regulation. Within this logic of technological inevitability, it's plausible that they kind of have to buy into the benefits that are presented to them, and that they act upon this ambition to be leaders in adoption and innovation and progress. But nothing about technological progress is inevitable. Its trajectory is not preordained. Yes, it's driven by some of the most powerful companies in the world, and they have a clear interest in the fact that we should be accepting what they propose in the shape that they propose it and push it out on us. But there's other ways the story can go, and I think it's really important to remember that it should be on us, the public, through our elected officials, to decide how, when, and under what circumstances we want to take up a certain technology.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you very much. Certainly rose with a provocation there, and I'm just kind of thinking of, I mentioned those words earlier on: enable, engage, and evolve. That the framework that Scotland's using, and you've got your three. I think you've got 3 E's there. So you talk about efficiency, efficacy, and then I think you got there without saying it directly. There was equity. And the play off between the democratization around AI, so consultation and participation, versus this corporatization of things. And I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but the former Greek treasurer, Yanis, talks about techno-feudalism, that we're in a period of techno-feudalism now, and that this is the kind of the end of capitalism, and we're moving into this new phase, this new era, basically, as well. And so what you're kind of outlining there, in a way, to me, is kind of speaking to some of those bigger concepts that are operating at a big structural level. I'll take a quick question from the floor for Anna. If you can tell us who you are, that would be wonderful.
My name's Anne Bennett. I'm here as an interested person, a policy practitioner. One of the things I wonder about with policy development is, I don't know how to explain it, but if you have it brought into government a lot and they're developing that policy and then people become reliant on it, what's the risk of losing the expertise? Once it's in there, is it hard to take it back out?
The expertise around the policy.
If you just say, I'm going to do my policy development through AI, and you cut down all of your policy staff and say my new tool for policy development is AI, if you then go, oh, I've made a mistake, how much have you locked yourself into AI as being the solution, and can you come back from that?
Yeah. I think that's a really great question, and I think it probably actually parallels to, other industries and sectors that have kind of moved to replace, knowledgeable employees and experts in doing what they're doing with AI. There's I think a kind of ironic example is the company Canva that I think fired a bunch of their staff, replacing with AI, only to, I think, a month later hire them all back because it didn't work. The AI didn't deliver on what they thought it could do. So I think that would happen. I think you can't just outsource the whole policy making process to AI. Certainly, I think there will be attempts to possibly cut down. I think what you're raising is a real risk. I think if you don't have the expertise, it's hard to get it back. And I actually would argue there's already like a bit of a problem that I think there should be more in-house expertise in public service, full stop, and to outsource it to AI is probably not the best way to go, but I think there's other people on the panel who have more thoughts on that.
I mean, who can remember phone numbers now that we've got mobile phones? I remember in the day if you met someone and they exchange your phone number, you could remember it. Who can remember a phone number now? You know, maybe the one that you at the home you grew up in, you can maybe remember that number from 30 years ago or whatever, or your partner. I don't even know my kids' phone numbers, you know, on their mobile. I know my wife's, but that's about it. So,
Google knows that.
yeah, leave it to AI. So we're going to move on. Sandy,
Yes,
over to you. The floor is yours.
thank you. Welcome everyone. It's my real pleasure to share some of my experience from the international space, like at the UN and also at the World Trade Organization, and hopefully this could also lend some relevance to Western Australia or maybe in Australia at large. So recently I just came back from Geneva, where they had the AI for Good Global Summit. It's hosted by the UN agency called ITU, and thousands of delegates from all over the world come together and talk about how do we deal with AI, how can we expand AI, how can we use it for good, and more importantly, what are some of the examples of misuse and abuse? So what was really interesting was last year I was invited to go and speak at the panel, and I found that a lot of the trends and a lot of the hot topic last year was about existential crisis. Are we going to survive this? You know, when we talk about ethics, which philosophy should we be based on? And a lot of it was also got to do with like how can we govern it, you know, globally? How can we hold corporations accountable while benefit from it? This year was quite different. This year, you know, in the center stage, there was, you know, halfway through the proceeding, a bunch of people went up and basically, you know, put out banners and political campaign like Free Palestine. So that was quite funny, interesting as well. And then there was a Ethiopian speaker went on the stage to talk about the misuse and abuse of AI in war zones. And 2 hours before she went up the stage, her slides were sanitized. And then she came down, and the journalist interviewed her, and it was all the rage. So it was quite interesting. I think this year particularly, the misuse and abuse of AI on political discourse, in advertising, multimedia, and also in warfare is a real concern. So Geoffrey Hinton, who is the godfather of AI, was one of the speakers. He just won a Nobel Prize Award last year, and he literally warned, AI is going to speed us up, or we're going to slow it down. And with the looks of things, we are being sped up. And so very often when I talk to policymakers at the World Trade Organization or with governments in Singapore, Asia, or even in Western Australia, very often I tend to ask the questions of where do these information come from? Where are these data set from? So, you know, this lady was asking about, you know, when we use AI to develop systems and so on, very often do we question where these data set come from, right? Intelligence, like power, are never neutral. It's based on the collective data that we've been collating over the years, and it tends to be Western, male-dominated, and techno-bro now, you know, and they're tiny group of people in Silicon Valley. And so is that reflective of the world? Let me remind everyone, 88% of world population are non-Western. So when we say, okay, let's look at standardization and how can these standards, ISO, OECD, EU, are going to inform our policy, a lot of times we forget to ask, like, which part of it do we localize? Can we do a copy and paste governance? I mean, the answer is no, it's not going to work. And not only that, whether has it taken into consideration of how we are going to be in the future amongst all the other cultures in the world. So if you look at the Aboriginal culture or even Asian culture, where I come from, AI advancement is slightly different from the West. So if you look at Asia, the adoption of AI is a lot faster, heaps faster, compared to the West. Why? Because you see a lot of paranoia in news and multimedia, and people are afraid, the Terminator case coming to haunt us. And there's it is important to take care of security risks, to take care of cybersecurity and all that. But it also adds a lot of cost to the compliance. So when I look at my clients in Europe, when they are adopting AI, their attitude is, oh, I have no idea how to do this, number one. I'm worried and I'm afraid of breaches. And number three, how much is it going to cost me? And if I have reputational risk, is it going to add on to my costs? Whereas in Asia, because I think some of the governments in Asia have adopted the education cross-skilling, upskilling a lot earlier, 6-7 years ago, like Singapore. So when the businesses are using the AI, it's more about how can I actually expand my marketing, my business, improve relationship with my vendors, my partners. So I got really interested in this underpinnings. Why are Asians adopting it a lot faster? Why is there a difference between caution versus speed? And is adoption logical? And is it always about speed? So then I realized that in Asia, there seemed to be a higher level of trust for the government. It's quite different from the West. Not right or wrong, it's just different, right? So, some people think that in Asia, people tend to just act like sheep and just follow what the government say. But that's because they believe that it's the government's job to protect the people. So if I give up my individual rights in order to have collective good, it's okay. So very often you hear from the West, individual rights is really important. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And also technical risks, like is it going to be efficient, how are we going to be bridged, so on and so forth. Whereas in Asia, it's like different. It's about, if I'm going to give up my private information for the collective good, that means it's okay, I will be protected. And more importantly, when I adopt an AI, how is this going to affect my relationship with my family, with my communication, and also with my business partners? Slightly different. So instead of task-based intelligence, in Asia, we focus more on relationship-based intelligence. And I think it's also the underpinnings of the fact that it's a collective society, and therefore, the way they look at the lenses when it comes to governance and policies is quite different. The way they frame it is, and I'm Asian, so I'm going to just speak from my experience. So Confucianism and Taoism are very much educated by Buddhism, right? And it's based on 3 philosophies. Number 1, is this particular technology or this advancement benevolent? Is it going to be good for society? Is it going to be compassionate? Is it going to help more people get out of poverty, get out of this condition? Number 2, is it righteous? Is it criminal? Is it going to hurt someone? Is it legal? And number 3, there's etiquette. So when Asians or when the Asian society adopt any kind of technologies, and by the way, we've been around for 5,000 years, so we've been constantly disrupted by technologies and innovation, we ask ourselves, when we do this, when we adopt this, is it going to fit into a particular cultural norm? Is it going to be offensive? Is it going to be accepting of differences? So, not being offensive is really important for Asian, right? So you have the right to express yourself, but we have the responsibility for our society. Just like you have the right to not wear a mask, but we have the responsibility to make sure that those who are vulnerable are not going to be exposed. So these are just the 2 very, very basic philosophy that's going to influence the way we think and the way we interact. And how is this relevant to our policy making? Well, we're going to interact with the rest of the world, and the rest of the world have very different social structure, different cultural structure. So it makes sense if we want to be part of the future, which is, look at our neighbors, or mostly Asia, and if we want to trade with them effectively, we want to communicate with them effectively, we need to co-create products and services with them effectively, then we really need to take into consideration their culture. And I wanted to leave everyone with this, final thought, is that AI is like a mirror of our institution. If our institutions are hierarchical, extractive, disconnected, so will AI. So if we want to have a better society, if we want to have a more inclusive society, then we need to make sure that our society, when we look at these policy making, can we take into consideration of other cultures? I mean, for example, the Aboriginals have been around for thousands of years. When they look at any kind of disruption, any kind of adoption of technology, they often think of the seventh generation legacy. We look at environmental stewardship. They look at seventh generation, which is in a total of 140 years. And they have collected data through not just words, but also oral tradition. Our Aboriginal people are also very effective in terms of keeping memory. So a university in the Eastern State actually did this study where they put 3 groups of students and they had to learn a memory technique. One is the song lines technique by the Aboriginal, one is the memory palace, and one is like whatever memory technique you choose. Those who learn the song line methods can remember exotic butterfly names 3 times better than anybody else. So when we look at our Aboriginal people and we say, let's be inclusive, let's not just do it as a form of representation or tick a box. We're essentially making our future policy a lot stronger, a lot more cohesive, and it's going to be a lot more sustainable. So I leave the audience with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. I'm going to break my rule of 3 here. But I've got 4 concepts that are kind of terms that are jumping off my brain, listen to what you're saying there. So, they're all prefixed with AI. So yeah. I think there's AI colonialism,
yes.
AI imperialism,
yes.
AI authoritarianism. I'm going to end on a positive note. AI communitarianism
yes.
is a way of thinking. And for me, synthesizing everything down what you said, I could probably use those 4 concepts as a way to start to, get a framework of thinking of the
yes.
landscape in some way. So I'll take a quick question from the audience if someone has a question for Sandy.
Yes.
Right at the back, sorry. Yeah, his hand is up first. Yep.
Me, yeah.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Kurush. I'm the co-founder of Pixor. My question to you, Sandy, and thanks for giving your presentation, is from your speech, it sounded like you wanted to say that we, as Australians, should be developing AI technology that represents us,
yes.
rather than having Silicon Valley develop.
Yes, absolutely. But at the moment, when you look at the majority of the AI and the language models and the governance, it's mostly from the US or from Europe. There's nothing wrong with that, but we must also understand we're a multicultural society. And we all know that whoever has the power, who has the historical power, gets to use certain tools to define how decisions are being made, resources are being allocated, and who gets to benefit from it, right? And so there is some biasness from it because AI and its data set are not developed in vacuum. It is based on a collection and a history of data sets. So if anything, the question is it possible that AI is going to make us better human beings? Because we are now rigorously going to look into this data set and ask ourselves questions like, when we go to any company, can we dare say, like, can you prove how many of the people working in your department in terms of coding are women? How many of them are actually minorities? How many of them are people of diverse background? Oh, we talk about diversity and inclusion like a tick in the box, but if anything, AI is going to force us to think really strategically about, right from the get-go, who is inputting these data, where do these data come from, and so on and so forth. And whether it is truly reflective of the wider society, or is it just a reflection of those in power, right? Which is sometimes can be very skewed.
Okay, thanks, Sam. So that's a nice segue because we're going to go to somebody who's in a position of power in the sense that
It's not
at
big
the
or
heart of
nasty,
government
it's
in the Department of Premier and Cabinet, and your role is to kind of you've got this eagle-eye view around AI. So, Ashley,
Oh my god.
over to you. No pressure.
I'm
No pressure
so
whatsoever.
intimidated going after you, Sandy and Anna. Shoot. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we're balancing, I guess, from a WA government perspective. Obviously, at a state government level, we deliver a lot of the services that actually have an impact in people's lives in WA, but it's really at that, I guess, that sub-national level where a lot of these things touch people's lives. So in the WA government, we're balancing the need to, I guess, stay ahead and be at the forefront and to not let the private sector kind of run away with all of the benefits. But at the same time, we have to work really hard to make sure that when we do use AI, we're using it responsibly and actually get behind what responsibility actually means and what safety actually means. So we've started off with an approach of trying to build a good base of governance approaches that will hopefully provide a foundation that will set us up for the future. And then with those kind of foundations in place, we're hoping to then move to a place where we can start engaging with AI technologies. And in some examples in the public sector, we already have agencies who are really at the forefront of considering a lot of these issues. So in 2024, I think it would have been now, just trying to think, everything has changed so quickly recently. We launched the WA Government AI Policy, and that was really based on the Australian AI ethics principles, which have been something that's really accepted by all different governments across Australia. So in that national framework that Paul talked about earlier, that's really where a lot of these principles come from, and the national framework draws off of these ethics principles. And so what the policy tries to do is it says to government agencies, this is at a high level what you should be thinking about when you're undertaking an AI project or something that's an automated decision-making project. Because if you think about the projects that government has done, that's caused harms in people's lives. It's not just AI, it's also that automated decision-making if you think about things like robo-debt. So we put in place the policy, and at the moment we've updated the policy to require there to be an individual, for instance, within agencies that have a mind to also ensure those ethics are actually being carried out at an agency level. So we call it an AI accountable officer. So that's the policy. And then we also have a requirement that all government agencies that I guess are doing a project, in order to make the policy, which is very high level, something really meaningful to the use case that's being used, is an AI self-assessment framework. And really what that is it's encouraging the people, you know, the data scientists or the tech leader within the agency who might be leading some of these projects within a vacuum to kind of step out a little bit, to think about each of those principles and how they're going to apply it within their project. So what that could tangibly mean, for example, is thinking about things like data protection, and really spelling out how they're doing that. What the data sets look like in the AI that they're using. Don't just procure it off the shelf and don't consider, you know, things like where the data has come from. Is it an American model, but then you're going to go and apply it and use it on Australians and it's not really going to work? So those kind of considerations. And then what the self-assessment framework does is it provides a risk rating to projects. So in government, we have to become very fluent in operating in a high risk or low risk environment. And this is kind of how we navigate and move through what we do and the services we deliver and how we make decisions. And so we have low all the way up to high risk. High risk projects, and what we've determined in the framework, are really things like when you go to offshore information. So when you're offshoring citizen data because you're putting it into an AI model, if that data is leaving our Australian shores, that increases the risk a little bit, and it depends which country, obviously, some of the data is being sent to. So we think about things like that, and obviously the ideal situation is that we keep the data and information locked down within the confines of our agencies and our own environments that we operate in. Another element that we consider is taken actually directly from the EU risk assessment, risk assessment, their AI Act. Basically, I think the EU Act has copped a lot of criticism from the private sector recently, but what the high risk ratings and settings that they've put into that Act provide for government is a really clear indication of, hey, when you use AI in certain contexts, it is inherently risky. So it's not right for us to say, for instance, an AI being used in a website, hey, consider things like security and all of these things, agency X, tell me if that's high risk. And they go, oh, everything's high risk to us. We're only, approved planning proposals, high risk. And then, for instance, Justice or WA Police or Health, for instance, go to apply a technology that really impacts citizens' lives or has the potential to, and they go, oh, cybersecurity, that's fine. Oh, it's going to benefit people. Oh, that's fine. And then they alter their risk rating because their concept of risk is a lot different to planning department, for instance. And so that's what that risk assessment is trying to capture. And then another consideration of risk is then that traditional risk matrix, or tell us about your site security, that kind of thing. So it's that kind of 3-step process that we've integrated into the self-assessment process. For those high-risk projects, we want to give an additional layer of oversight. And so what we've established recently is an AI advisory board. And that has people from government, but then also experts that are, coming from all across Australia who've applied to be on the board. They sit on the board, and we actually have academics from UWA as well on it. And they have so much knowledge in AI, in the space of AI, and also from the communities that they represent. And they can tell us the risks that we haven't recognised from a government perspective. Then what they do with those recommendations is they can also then surface them with Director Generals, the AI accountable officer at the agency. So they have a really good oversight of what the risks actually are. And they can provide extra, mechanisms to try and decrease and mitigate risks within the project. But then they can also give recommendations on how to improve what's being undertaken. And so those are the 3 core foundational principles and components that we have in our governance framework, but we also have other elements which I can talk about through further questions. But that governance model is not just theoretical, so I'll just talk about very briefly some of the projects we're undertaking in WA that use AI. So one of the ones I always love to talk about is called Hive, which sounds super creepy, but it's called Health in a Virtual Environment. And what Hive is it's undertaken in the Eastern Metropolitan Health Service. So what they do is they give patients, this is all consent based by the way, they give patients these wearable devices and they give them to them in a high risk kind of clinical setting, and also when they become outpatients as well. And it allows doctors to get an extra kind of indication as to when a patient's vital signs are deteriorating. Now a lot of people go, oh, hang on, AI is now telling doctors what to do. No. So what Hive does is it gives an extra indication. It's just like the monitor going off in the hospital. So all of these components, we have to very carefully think through things like human in loop and make sure that those are all delivered and in effect. So that's Hive, which is really helping doctors with their really important workload. Then we have the Department of Transport's Dotbot, which I'm not sure if anyone has used it yet, but it helps people get information from the Department of Transport website, which has not been, the easiest to navigate, and it helps people access those services a lot more easily. There are more which I could talk about, but I'm just going to mention one that everyone is probably familiar with if you're in a corporate environment at the moment. So we have over 20 government agencies at the moment using Microsoft Copilot and testing that and seeing how that works within an agency setting. And what I'll say is something that is good about Copilot is it's taking AI not just from the level of the conceptual thing that gets done in the data team, but it's something that is now being done by used by the policy person who's writing policy. It has to be done by, it gets used by an admin assistant, it gets used by everyone so that they can become more acquainted with how helpful AI can be and how helpful it cannot be. If you're using AI every day, I feel like it's very difficult for you, unless you're living in a kind of optimistic bubble, to not realise where it also doesn't work. So that's just some of the considerations we have at the moment in the public sector.
Excellent, thanks. It's good to hear that from from inside the government base, if I can call it that, if we're talking about AI base.
Yes.
And Dotbot, I haven't used it, so but I told you the botocracy was kind of taking over inflation. So, but just thinking about what you're saying there, Ashley, I'm thinking about kind of the policy architecture and the processes that you've outlined there in a way. So about, the policy filtration, the adaptation, the implementation, the evaluation, and the redevelopment that's going on when you're thinking through kind of, what is AI and how and what shouldn't be used within government systems.
Yeah.
So it's, we're looking at that, AI in policy making and also policy making on AI so that they're in a loop with one another, they're integrated. So that's kind of really interesting to hear. I'll throw it out to the floor for a question for Ashley. Gentleman right here at the front.
I have big concerns about how data is used in government and governance. If you look at Robodebt, for example, a classic example of a massive failure, and just yesterday there was evidence given that one level of government wasn't letting another level of government know. And the government is really uptight about freedom of information. They're trying to keep a handle on who knows what and not let people know stuff. So how is governance going to be improved if those kind of processes are not improved in government? Do you know what I mean? So if everybody is locking things down and not letting data sets out and so on, how does one part of government know what the other part of government is doing, and how do we actually make governance better?
That's a very big question.
An easy one.
To be honest, the question of how can one part of government let the other part of government know what it's doing, and for that to be an effective mechanism is still something that I constantly am encountering in government that just does not work properly. But what I'll say, so in the data space, we've delivered something very recently that passed the WA Parliament in 2024, so it was the Privacy and Responsible Information Sharing legislation, and so I don't have to say that again, I'll just call it CRIS. And what that does is it provides, it delivers a privacy component, so it provides all of the privacy protections that Western Australians didn't have before. So it says things like government, you can't just have data breaches and lose this very sensitive information and not report it to someone. It has to be overseen by our Information Commissioner, which we now have in WA, if some of you have seen recently. So there's actually an individual now that's responsible for overseeing those things who can see to privacy complaints, which is really important as we start to move more into the AI space. But in terms of data sharing, because at my other hat is I work in a data team, full disclosure. So our interest is also to ensure that government data, which has a real potential to help people and to inform services, where it's really essential that it does get shared, but it's shared in a way that still respects obviously individuals' privacy. Which there are ways you can do that. So we also then, in that legislation, it also, there's not just privacy, which is agnostic to data sharing, there's then data sharing, which is also not just called data sharing, it's called responsible information sharing. It provides a very clear framework for how the WA public sector should be sharing information. And so we now have a chief data officer that has responsibility. They've not been appointed yet, but we now have that office in law, which has a real obligation to ensure those things happen. So I guess I'll just mention very quickly, we also have a privacy principle which has not been implemented anywhere else in Australia in that legislation, which is around that automated decision-making requirement. So people have a right to review for things like robo-debt, which is something that was a major flaw in that kind of initiative.
Yeah, I think the in the UK there's some discussion about the tax office speaking to social services in terms of people who are receiving welfare benefits and stuff, and privacy concerns and moral and social concerns about those things as well. So, well, it might be in a nice rational policy sense, it might seem like a good idea.
Yes.
But the morality and ethics can become quite complex in there when you're trying to have whole of government approaches to policy making. Even.
Yeah, everything originally sounds like it's a great idea and it has great intentions, and the public sector endeavours in that kind of way. But that's why it's important to have governance frameworks that are really comprehensive, that force the people who are developing those kind of technologies to do it in a responsible way that considers all of these different elements.
Okay, so I'm going to open it up to the audience. You've all been sitting quietly, hopefully cogitating, thinking about a question. And look at the hands going up straight away. This lady here, if you can tell us who you are, where you're from, that would be really helpful.
Emma Ewan, previously with CSIRO. But my question is thinking sort of more in the longer term, going beyond just bots that do stuff for government and more this sort of artificial general intelligence where they're smarter than humans. Is there any thought or discussion around world regulation of that, similar to nuclear energy, where it's incredibly dangerous and it should be in the hands of a few select people, or what's the discussion around that?
So at the UN, actually before the conference, the AI for Good Global Summit in Geneva at the UN last month, earlier this year at Davos, the UN, for example, and a number of world leaders, plus the Vice President of the International Federation of Red Cross have gotten together, and basically they're playing for governments not to use AI in warfares. So they could not explain how AI is picking some targets and not picking other targets. Because the AI is a predictive tool. It can predict 10, 20, 100 steps ahead of humans. And the controversy this year at the AI for Good Summit is that whose responsibility is it? So say, I'll give you an example. Amazon has these drop-off points for the drones. And then you also have the Google that triangulates the location, right, with the mapping. So I'm not going to say which government, but there is one government at the moment who are using these technologies to triangulate where to bomb. And a lot of times they are civilians' targets. And so is it the responsibility of the corporations, or is it the responsibility of the government to not use these technologies? Because I'll give you an example. We know that the daughter or the wife of this particular leader is going to do their grocery there. So if we bomb that particular convenience store, she dies, he will be devastated, so on and so forth, and there will be like a whole trigger of consequences. So they're pleading for the government to not do that. Unfortunately, the sad thing about governments is that if you ask one government to slow down on the advancement, the government is going to say, what about my enemy? What if the other guy is more advanced? So the problem is not with AI, it's always with human beings. We don't trust each other.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
But that can be sort of separated apart. You've got the defence angle, but then you've also got the capability of the science and the tech. And I guess my question is whether that increased capability, whether it's defence or health or whatever, is there a bar that perhaps we shouldn't go above where AI is more intelligent?
I think at the moment, the biggest problem we have is job displacement. That's the biggest problem that we have at the moment, and a lot of governments in the world do not have solution. So if you're a fresh grad, going out to work, everything that you learned the last 4 or 5 years is going to be redundant. And then if you're an elderly person who hasn't been upskilling, cross-skilling, you'll also be put out of the job. So that is the biggest problem that they have. And then obviously the AI for Good Summit also has an element of encouraging businesses, small business owners, startup companies to come up with solutions for the blind, for the environment, for the mothers or for the refugees in camps and stuff like that. So this is why it's called AI for Good Summit. So you see some of that application, but at the moment, I actually saw some of the pitching session and it was quite inspiring. It's really inspirational. The only problem is a lot of them talks about the technology, and no one talks about who is going to be trained, how they're going to be trained to use these technologies, and the cost per unit. That's the problem.
So Prashant, just want to add what Sandy has talked about. If you look at the world the way it is at the moment, and if you look at the talks, what's happening around the world, everyone is focusing what the future will look like. And if you look at what happened a couple of months ago, Trump actually signed you can't buy certain chips, you can't export certain chips. Taiwan is one of the largest producers of those chips. NVIDIA is the biggest company which is producing those chips. So if you look at the globe, there are countries which are controlling not only the manufacture of those critical infrastructure for AI, but also the distribution of it. Now, if you look at the world, we all fly by plane. We don't really know which aircraft we are flying, but there's only one or two companies controlling the whole globe, and it's just safe to use. So aircraft being used to travel as well, leisure. We go to Bali almost so often. It should be part of our Western Australia. That's a different story, but also we have 5th generation or 6th generation stealth fighters. So it's not about the capacity that being created, it's how we use it. AI, as Sandy mentioned, has been absolutely adopted in the developing world. I can go on and on talking about how AI has actually eliminated lot of pain and suffering in a lot of democratic countries, and people are using it. So technology as a tool, as a digital tool, is actually changing people's lives. If you look at the world at the moment, the countries which are growing faster are the countries which are adopting to AI. So if you look at the world, AI is actually one of those which is powering our economy. If you look at 100 years ago, what happened? We have steam engine, we have coal powering the economies. So AI is just another aspect of this industrial revolution where this is critical for our future. So whether we're talking governance, whether we're talking government, whether we're talking personal relationship, everything will be getting into digital land, and AI is going to give you that tool. So we need to make sure that we should have, and in my belief, Australia, we should have our sovereign AI capability. The data center should reside here. The chip should reside here. We should have expertise locally. If we can't install those foundational, we will have no control in our future prosperity and peace. I hate to say that. I know a couple of big companies. Not invested in Western Australia, but they've gone to Singapore using their AI. So what I say, it's right time to invest. India is investing $1.3 billion US dollars between 2024 to 29 as part of the AI strategy. So massive investment is required. So government are actually injecting a lot of funding in developing local sovereign AI capability because they know that this is the tool, we're going to use it to deliver citizen services and make people's lives better.
Just on quickly on Sandy's point about jobs and employment, you might have missed it today, but Jobs Skills Australia just released their report about the jobs of the future in AI and which ones are going to be most directly affected and which ones are going to be least directly affected. So cleaners will be the least directly affected, and construction workers.
Plumbers.
Yeah. White collar workers are the areas basically which are going to be most kind of directly affected by things. Yeah. So I'm going to turn to Professor Michael Small there in the back. Michael, do you have a question?
Actually, academics will be affected as well, right? So my question's all a simple yes or no question, so be ready for that. But my question is AI actually a new problem, or is it just making existing problems more acute? So what I mean is, when you're talking about governance, everything you're talking about is that I heard is really an issue about data and data control and data access. Everything you talked about with Sandy, with representation, having a proper representation in the media, is because it's a media problem. It's the fact that the media was being used to train the AI. It's not the AI's fault.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we've been trying to compensate for that in Australia for decades with local content and so forth. Drones, essentially, a lot of the issues there are similar to issues that we have with like perverse incentivization legislation for negative equity or to get people to buy EVs by not charging to use the roads that they're destroying. Is it a new problem, or is it just making existing problems more acute?
Who would like? Anna, you go. They mentioned drones in there, so there's an opening for you to get to.
I just talk when there's drones. No, I completely agree with you that we're really looking at just sort of a new platform on which pre-existing issues play out. And I talked about how I look at these technologies mainly through like a lens of, you know, how's the power distributed, like similar to what Sandy said, and I think that's just a very old story repeating itself again and again. And I think it's just that with some of the technologies, I think drones are a really good case study.
Drones are cool.
Because I mean they can be, and I think I want to be very clear. I think there's great applications for drones. There's not so great applications too, but what I'm trying to get at is that I think drones are actually such a visceral embodiment of a lot of these issues because we have very strong reactions to them because they're loud, because they're intrusive, because we can see them. And so I actually like to use the drone to illustrate the things that we come up against with AI, which is so much more intangible in many ways, even though everyone's mind is on it and it's everything you read online and everywhere. But I think it's just much easier to be angry at an e-scooter, which I think has a lot of parallels to what drones are doing, or to be angry at the drone that's constantly flying over your rooftop because your neighbour's ordering takeout 8 times a day. And so I think it's really important that these things are discussed in more of like a meta level and not the company meta, but just that we have a bird's eye view of what's at stake here. And again, I think it's really about not taking these things as preordained. Like we need to be more creative about what do we care about really, like what's at stake here. And superintelligence is such a great distraction from the things we already have to deal with. The AI applications that we have are being enabled through infrastructures and power structures that are already super destructive. With labor costs, people who have to clean up data sets are working in the worst conditions in the parts of the world that probably don't have access to the benefits of the AI. And data centers are being built in the most drought-prone areas in the world and contribute to further energy demand, which is all but helping the energy crisis. So I think there's a lot of things that we need to pay attention to, which are not just AI problems, but I think AI is really drawing a lot of attention to.
It can't just be always about profit and efficiency. If we only focus on that, we're going to create a very unjust society. So that is a message that we really need to really think about. AI is going to make us better people or make us worse human beings. That's it.
Excellent.
I'll just briefly add that from experience in government, a lot of the problems are already there, albeit quietly. And people have been talking recently about the tendency for people to over-rely on AI. And even in that example, some people already had a tendency to over-rely on what they potentially read online, copy-paste, put it in this thing and run with it. We see the same thing from a cyber perspective. It just only really escalates the cyber risk when you're thinking about where is the information going.
And also, one last thing, from a self-preservation perspective, last week there was a study that came out. They said that people who didn't use AI as a support tool, but basically as a copy and paste tool, not even thinking in process, it's actually affecting our creativity and innovativeness by 60%. So when people said 20 years ago, Google is making us dumb because we just rely on what the search engine is giving us, and then people are making us more disconnected because of social media, giving us this impression that we are very popular. If anything, AI is going to make us dumber because we no longer try to use our brain and try to exercise it. Try next time when you're really tempted to use an AI, not use AI and see if you can come up with anything creative.
A couple of points on that too. I think it's interesting to talk about the energy thing, and I can think this is an opportunity for Western Australia to be leaders in providing infrastructure for artificial intelligence and data centers, because we got solar powers, we got hydrogen, we got all the minerals and critical minerals available to spin up data centers and AI centers here, sustainable one. Coming to the question about the capacity within the sector or data sharing in the sector, those things are still there. If you look at the process for the last 10-15 years, the capacity in the sector has been stripped away, not only because a lot of people left the sector, but also we didn't have attraction for a lot of businesses, a lot of people to be part of that. And one of the things was we are always relying on big 3, big 4, big 5, and we've seen that. So we have outsourced a lot of decision making, a lot of that capacity to the external provider, and that's the consequence of that, is that we don't have internal capacity. So forget the AI is stripping the capacity. We have already stripped the capacity already. So that is not an AI problem. So what we can do is to actually use AI to maximize whatever resource we have, not doing the paper or printing or turning the handle, but actually value adding. I use AI to speed read a lot of documents. I don't think it's dumbing me down, actually making me more smarter. I can amplify my learning much more faster. And this is the challenge we have, that if AI have biases within, we need to make sure the product we are using is safe to use. There's tick of approval. It's not about that. It's about how we can actually make sure there's a human oversight to it. I always said to Paul, like AI is like a big elephant, but we have to ride it with a hook as a human. So every decision we make is not based on AI. It's about me as a citizen or the worker or the public sector employee taking that decision. It's my decision. Empowered by it, that's okay, but it's my decision. People use calculator. When I grew up, studying a high school or a Catholic school in India, no calculator. We're using mental math, so I've not used calculator at all. But if you go to grocery store, sometimes you get them change, they struggle. The kids struggle. And now there's no key. Anyway, there's a machine that I can track. I hate to say that. Like this 5 cameras looking at me while I'm buying a pack of milk. That to me is also very distracting. That humanness has gone. So we want to make sure that we use the technology with a human oversight, and also make sure it's safe to use. So I think there's no problem with the technology. It's problem the way we're going to use it and how we're going to actually make sure the data set, because we don't want to create structures, governance, department. We want to deliver services. A lot of people don't know that Main Road doesn't do council road. Council does other roads. So we need to make sure it's service oriented, citizen at the center of it, and the services around it. It doesn't matter whether that service comes from state government, local government, from the bank, or from grocery store, whatever. It has to be looked from that angle. Citizen first, make sure citizen has trusted, and we build the foundation. We don't have digital identity at the foundational level. We don't have those infrastructure to power our future growth, and that's the worry at the moment, that we are 5-6 years behind. The world is actually moving so fast, what Sandy said. Asia and other economies are moving very, very fast, and we are just lagging.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Look, I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to draw proceedings to a close, but I like this idea of kind of AI sovereignty, because for me it kind of speaks to, within a public policy context, what is the public interest, centering the public interest of this. And I mean, that in itself is a very contested term, and I think, Sandy, in terms of what you were saying, within a multicultural context like Australia or any other country, is it not a case now of more public interest? It's not a singular thing, because with multiculturalism you get diversity and a sense of atomization happening around things. But the creation of sovereignty within Australia. So I think the work that you're doing actually in the department is looking at state sovereignty in a way and trying to figure that out in that sense. How can we control this in some way? But again, just in the last couple of days, what's his name, Scott Farquhar was, from the Tech Council, and so we're coming back to the Productivity Commission's kind of report and the issue around creatives. His kind of arguments on 730 report, I think the other night where he was talking about, basically it should be open slather, under certain conditions, and is that sovereignty or is that private interests trumping over sovereignty? But thanks very much for your provocations, your thoughts, your insights, and thank you all for coming, and we show some appreciation for our panelists. We're going to hang around we've got time to hang around for about 20 minutes or so if you've got some time to hang around, then you can have a chat, I think, with our panelists, and you can enjoy the hospitality of Forrest Research Foundation. Big thanks to Louise and James and the team here at Forrest. It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure working with them. They're great colleagues that, we have a wonderful collaboration with them. Big thanks to my team, Claire and Ben, wherever they are, if they're still here. So without them, I don't do anything. And a big thank you for coming out tonight as well to listen to everything. So travel safe and see you at the next one.